building transparent and ethical generative AI models in high-tech industries, primarily focused on healthcare, financial, financial services. And today's content that I'm going to talk is solely based on my personal research. Nothing is related to my current or previous employer. So, as we all know, we are seeing the power of generative AI can transform industries, the way they operate, and even the way they can scale when compared to the past, right? However, most of the use cases, the current use cases, are falling in three buckets. The first one is question answering, where you can see knowledge bots or customer facing bots, so on and so forth. The next bucket is text summarization, where you can see internal or summarization of the documents, calls, chats, so on and so forth. The third one is again mostly used internally within the organizations for emails, marketing, code generation, and use logic, so on and so forth, right? So, however, we are using generative AI in enterprise and companies. It's mostly an API call that's giving us the end actions, right? So, in order to adopt Gen AI into the organizations, there needs to be a good set of risks assessed as well as more responsible AI practices in order to mitigate the risks generated from the Gen AI. So, let's see the importance of risk assessment in Gen AI. Let's assume an example, right? A customer facing chatbot in with respect to the bank. That chatbot suddenly giving an output on harmful content or biased content or irrelevant content, right? So what is it? What are the consequences related to that, right? It's mostly related to the uh, reputational risk, as well as even a huge organizational trust is in stakes, as well as there is a even compliance in that perspective. So there are lots of consequences if the Gen AI models are not really uh, well assessed with the risk, right? So what you can see with risk management specific to Gen AI can helps us in mitigating the data leakage, privacy threats, security levels vulnerabilities, compliance, operational failures, so on and so forth. However, the risk associated to Gen AI can be governed at two different levels. One is at the use case level, the other one is at the model level. Where you can see the model level, we can assess at the what is the impact of this specific use case at the organization level. The next is customer, whether it's between the customer and the business, or how well it's been between the critical infrastructure, and if there is any human oversight, right? So, and the next one is model level. We'll go deeper into both of these sectors, both of these scenarios. So the primary, if there is a proactive risk assessment being done in Gen AI before deployment to the production, it can be more trustworthy and reliant Gen AI solutions. Mm. And the next step is how to assess, since we are talking about risks, right? So first, let's understand how to assess the risk. Usually, there are two dimensions where we can assess the risk of a system. The one is criticality, the other one is likelihood. So, criticality corresponds to the severity of the consequences for a given AI system failing, and an unexpected output. So, where you can see catastrophic level, critical, marginal, and negligible. Where catastrophic is nothing but the loss of human or a system failure or a business disruption, and the other one is critical, where you can see where you can assume there is a long-term injuries, major service disruption, so on and so forth. The other one is marginal, very temporary harm, and negligible is minor issues, right? Now we have known the severity of the consequences. Now let's look at the likelihood of it happening, right? So how frequent um, it's going to happen. So it can be classified into four divisions, like very likely, likely, moderate, and low likely. So with these two dimensions, we can estimate the how what's the severity of the consequence and of how often it's going to happen, and we can certainly weigh if this use case is going to have a positive impact to the organization or a negative impact, right? So this is one way in assessing the risk with respect to any AI initiatives. But with respect to generative AI, right, there are four major categories. That is model and output risk, legal and compliance risk, and security risk, performance reliability risk. So within model and output risk, right, there is a uh, widely known thing called hallucination, where we get the fabricated outputs, even though it's underlying there is no ground truth, and there could be a toxic outputs, there could be a bias outputs, and the copyright copying risk. There is a huge copyright risk with respect to the generative AI, and there is a data leakage risk at an enterprise level, and the other one is prompt injection attacks. Primarily, when there is a customer facing use cases, there could be a high risk for prompt injection attacks and misleading content and over reliance on the model. So now let's see how this risk can be how this major risks are being in different use cases, right? If you can see in a customer journey, right, a chatbot for customer service, where you can see there is an hallucination risk, and then bias. There is a bias risk being there is a risk, and there is a data leakage, where you can see chatbot is being sharing the customer or PI data, personal identity information. So that's one thing. And the other one is prompt injection, where you can see malicious prompts coming in and extracting the, it could be a threat or just extracting the unwanted information, and it could even be misleading content as well. And even for generation or summarization of the content, it's again there is an hallucination risk, there is a bias in place, copyrights issue, and misleading content. And the other one is coding. It's again the same, where you can see the risks like misleading prompt injection and copyright issues. Even the content creation is also similar to coding. So these are the risks associated at each use case level. The next is, let's see how the risk when within the same industry, how the risk is being divided into two specific use cases, right? The one to the left is Gen AI assistant for financial advisors. The one to the right is Gen AI for automated loan underwriting, where you can see where in the first use case, provide an on-demand summary of client portfolio, risk profile, and relevant market news to financial advisors during client interaction, where you can see operational impact is low and business customer impact is medium, since there is a human in the loop, and there is a critical infrastructure disruption is really low, and human oversight is yes, right? But towards the right, Gen AI automated loan underwriting, where you can see leveraging Gen AI to assess credit worthiness and make lending decisions, right? If you assess risks for this specific use case, where you can see organizational impact is really high, business customer impact is also high, and critical infrastructure is also really high, and there is no human oversight, since Gen AI is taking the decisions like agentic AI and even actions. So within the same industry, but within where there is a different use case, the risk of an with respect to the Gen AI has changed a lot, and so it is really important to weigh for each Gen AI use case the risks and how it can be mitigated, right? So now we have seen at the organization level, organization level. Let's see at the model level risks. The other one is where you can see there is a hallucination context still remain in for an advisor, and bias, a little bit of bias, and there is a chances of data leakage and misleading content as well. There is a high chance of misleading content for the advisor. And whereas coming to the loan underwriting, right, there is a high chance of hallucination and bias, of course, and data leakage as well, and over reliance on, there is a high over reliance on Gen AI or AI generated outputs. So again, here even at the model level risk, where you can see the the use case which towards the right has too many high risk categories. And you may ask me, now we have seen about the risks, right? The key takeaways here would be like how could we mitigate them, right? We could use rags to the use case on the left. We could use rags and also generate confidence scores and disclaimers to the users about how confident the generated content is, and even apply filters on bias and toxic filters, where it could reduce the toxic as well as the bias generated by the model, and even implement data masking for privacy issues. And of course, there is a human in the loop where we can utilize if the generated content is trustworthy or not. And the coming to the use case on the right, which is really needed in mitigating, is like having an explainable AI decision traceability, where given an answer, if we can trace back the decisions of when and where, what was the source of the model taking the decisions, and having a fairness audits quite often, and and even having adversarial or red team testing on the stimulated outcomes, whether it performance really reliable or not, right? So these are some mitigation strategies we can use with respect to these use cases. But let's see some of the few of the mitigation strategies with respect to all the risk that we have previously listed. When coming to the hallucination, right, the one thing we can use is rack system. The other one is having a huge prompt shields as well as a human oversight protocol for reducing the hallucination. The next one is toxic outputs, where implement a comprehensive data sanitization process, as well as um, establishing a clear governance framework for reducing the toxic output. And even in order to reduce the bias, uh, having a bias assessment done post and pre development, and and having a more representative data sets, and even for copyright, coming up with a content verification system, and also having a clear boundaries with respect to the intellectual properties. And coming to the data leakage, having a strict data access policies with respect to the model, which data it can access and which data it cannot. And coming to the prompt injection, where we need to really be careful in sanitizing the prompts, as well as validating the input of the model, not only the output, in order to reduce the risk or prompt injection attacks from the model. And the next is misleading content. We need to have a another we can have another LLM or a generative AI use case just to detect the fact checking or verification tool in place. And for over reliance, we might have to even make sure there is a training conducted within the organization or enterprise to make sure how far we can rely on the gen AI output. So these are the few mitigation strategies from the practice. And as it to summarize all, Gen AI has a huge potential in transforming and scaling the industries and businesses. But however, if we need to make sure that we utilize the Gen AI more responsibly and more transparent, such that we won't end up in a tough consequences. So that's my talk. Thank you all.